welcome to the show today. Today I have Patrick Hertzog on the show, and he's one of the co-founders and the user experience officer at Nexthink, and I'm super excited to have you here. I've been following Nexthink since a couple of years, and been incredibly astonished at what you guys have done. I don't know if you still call yourself a startup or not, but it's
That's a very good question. I would like to. I think that the right word now is a scale up, but we try to keep that startup culture inside the company for sure.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being here, Patrick. So let's dive right into your story from the beginning. So tell us a little bit about who is Patrick and what's the journey you've been on so far.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having me on this session. So I'm maybe not to start from the early beginning, but I've graduated from the EPFL in Lausanne in 2001. So it's been a long time ago. I've studied computer science, but from that my study, basically I was always interested in user interfaces. So the design of them, the implementation, of course, as a software engineer at heart, I would say, and everything revolving around the user. So just after my studies, I've worked in a small startup in Lausanne that had nothing to do with what we do at Nexthink. It was about business travel planning and booking. It was a great team. I learned really a lot there. In the early days when I just joined, we got bought by another German company, a bit bigger. I stayed there for a couple of years. And then we were still doing some research project with the EPFL. And that's how I met Pedro, who is one of the other co-founders of Nexthink. And he was still at the EPFL in the artificial intelligence lab. We met there, and he was looking for, having this idea of creating a company, Nexthink, that will become Nexthink afterwards. And he was looking for someone with a bit of experience, especially someone with the kind of skills that I already had in terms of data visualization and UX, basically. Even in that time, I'm not sure it was still already called UX, but we wanted to create a product, and that was a good match, and we started the company. So it was back in 2004. And then we had a third co-founder joined us, Vincent, who was more taking care of the sales marketing part in the early days. And that's basically how we started Nexthink.
It's super interesting, and I think it's also a really interesting journey. And if you don't mind, I'd really love to go a little bit into the journey, and also the journey specifically on the product side. Maybe not from the technical side, but more in terms of, the human side of the product, so to say. What I really want to focus on, we talked about this, is this topic of human-centered innovation, and really understand from your perspective, because you seem to be at the very heart of this, how important is the human factor in innovation, in digital products, and why is it an important aspect?
So for me, having the human in the center is key. Well, I'm a user experience person, so that's kind of natural for me. But I think when you build a product, at the end you build it for someone, for a human person at the end. So that's really important to keep that person in mind all the time. Of course, there might be some differences, if you are in a B2C market where it's really the person who will pay, your customer will be the users, basically, or the human. In a B2B market, as we are at Nexthink, it might be a bit different. The weight of the final user is maybe a bit different. Not saying it's less important, but it's maybe a bit different because it's not the end user that will pay for your product at the end. But still, I think having the human at the center is very important, and I think it's important whatever the product you are making. Maybe there are a few exceptions if you do some really technical side that are for backend stuff that might be a bit different, but in most of the cases, I think it's always, you're always building a product for someone who has a problem, who needs to do something, and you want to solve that problem for that person. So I think that's key.
Let's talk about this B2B aspect specifically that you mentioned before, where basically you have different stakeholders involved. In that case, mainly two, basically the one that is paying, so to say, is different than the one that is using it. Talk to me about that. Like, how do you deal with this? Like, what do you focus on? Who do you focus on? And is there sort of like a balance that you strike, or how do you manage that situation?
Well, I think there are even more stakeholders, and it's not only the one who pays, the one who uses. I think there's the one who wants maybe the product, the one who will pay for it, and the one who will use it. Sometimes it's people, sometimes it's different people. It depends. So I think, of course, when you are selling to an enterprise, I think you have to focus on people who want the product and who will pay the product. That's for sure. That's your main focus. That's for sure, because at the end, I mean, you have to sell it, so you have to get the budget. So that's important to put your focus when you are selling on these people. But then maybe it doesn't mean that you don't care about your users, because at the end it's important to please and to delight your users. Nowadays, almost everybody is selling software as subscription. So at the end, even if you were able to convince the other stakeholders, the users has to be delighted, and that's important. Otherwise, they won't renew. Of course, it's not just that your product looks fine and it's working well, it's easy to use. I mean, of course, you have to bring value to the customer. You have to bring value to all stakeholders, basically. That's really important.
And how do you get that value to the people? Like, how do you? I mean, if the end goal is making it as valuable as possible for the people who use it and for the people who buy it, either they're the same or the different people, it doesn't really matter. But if the end goal is value, how do you get there? Like, how do you ensure that you have the highest chance to getting to the maximum value?
Well, I think the first step is to really understand these stakeholders, let's say the customer, and understand their pains, and really bringing a solution to their pains. That's how you bring value.
How deep do you need to understand somebody to create real value for them? I mean, when you say pain, it can be as surface level as, some process is working too slow, right? Mm-hmm. Is that enough, or like how deep do you go in terms of understanding the people, the human beings?
I think most probably it will depend on your market and what problems you want to solve. In our case, at Nexthink, our mission is also pretty human-centric, because our official mission is to delight people at work. So even we really want our customer to have their employees delighted when they work, and this comes to several pains. There is the pains today from the employees that maybe they don't have a good digital experience. Their desktop is not working well, their computer, they don't have access to the right application, they are slow, and so on and so forth. That's a pain, I would say, for the employees. But having this, I would say, issue or this problem of digital experience is also a pain for the companies, for the customers. Because it costs a lot of money for them. It's a lot of productivity that is lost. There are studies that have shown that people are losing on average 22 minutes per day due to IT issues. So that's a lot of time of productivity that is lost. And it means that it's a lot of money, and it's also a lot of money to fix all this issue. So it's really to understand this pain and really to understand. Yeah, I mean, at the end, you have to understand why the companies, why your customers or your user would buy your product.
Yeah, I love that. I love the focus on the why. Why would they actually,
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're not selling features. You're not selling a product, I would say. You're selling a solution to a problem. So you really have to understand and to show to sell why the people would buy your product. And sometimes you have to do a bit of explaining why they would need your product. But that's the most important. It's not just selling features, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a big difference between features and solutions, or features and benefits, basically. You recently had a keynote about, I think it was digital product creation, if I'm not.
Yeah. It was about shaping a digital product for success. Yes.
Yeah, I love that, shaping a digital product for success. I'm not good. I don't want to like just recap the whole keynote, but I'm just super. I mean, the topic, of course, is perfectly relevant, right? So I would like to dive a little bit more into this. Like, are there certain principles that you use, that you focus on to actually, shape something, shape a digital product for success? Is there anything that you could share there a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, the key is not to try to, I would say, to create the perfect product at once. I mean, creating a successful product is not that you have an idea, you build the perfect product, then you ship it and you sell it. It doesn't work that way. It's more about doing a lot of iterations as quickly as possible, and every time, adjusting and taking into account the feedbacks that you may get from the market, from your customers, from your users, from opportunities. Sometimes it's just a matter of having an opportunity, and it makes you kind of shape your product. So it's really about iterating. That's a whole agility thing, iterating as fast as possible on your product. And then I would say the challenge is, for each of these iterations, you face many different alternatives. Usually, you could do this, or you could do that, this way or that way. You have many different alternatives, many things you could do, and it's about how you find the right alternative. How do you decide what to do? That is kind of difficult but interesting at the same time, and this is where you bring a lot of value. So then the second part of my keynote was really about how do you define, how do you evaluate these alternatives to choose at the end the right one. And that's what I do with my team. Basically, what is a good product design? So how do you evaluate and choose the alternatives?
So how do you do that? Not in detail, maybe, but just, I mean, now I'm just like super curious, like, because, making these decisions is incredibly difficult. And if you make, the wrong decision, in a sense, it could end up costing you a lot of money and a lot of time to, change course along the way again, right? So,
well, if you do this quick iteration, the goal is that it doesn't cost you too much if you do mistakes always happen. But the goal is there's a saying that you need to fail fast. That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, you have, if you do a mistake, that happens. It's better to identify as quickly as possible to be able to adjust the course or to revert. But what I'm proposing for solving this I would say this problem, or how to evaluate these alternatives, it's a matter of finding the right trade-off between 5 criteria that I identified. All the life is always about trade-offs. Trade-offs are very important, and that's what makes things at the same time difficult but interesting, and where you bring value. You have always to find the right trade-off. And what I'm proposing, so the 5 criteria where you need to find the trade-off, maybe I can just cite them very, very quickly. So the first one is the usefulness. I mean, you have to create something that is useful for your users. If you are doing a beautiful product that is very easy to use, but it doesn't solve the user problem, at the end it's pointless. So you have to be sure how useful it is. Then all of these criteria, they are not binary. It's not black or white. It's always somewhere in the middle. So the usefulness is the first one. Then I have 2 that are kind of linked to the usability. Is the ease of learn of the product, or how difficult it will be to learn your feature of your product. Again, it might depend on the industry you are. It depends on your users. Sometimes you can afford people to have to be trained for your features or for your product. Sometimes they have to be very intuitive. So that's another criterion. Then there is the ease of use. That's more about how easy or how efficient is it to use your product. Again, maybe you will have users using your product to do a task dozens of times during a day. So you better have something that is pretty efficient and not having to do many clicks every time, for instance. Then I added one, which is about coolness. I strongly believe that if you want to provide a delightful experience, you have to have a kind of a cool product. It can, materialize different ways, but I think that's important to keep that emotional aspect as well in your product. And the last one, which I think is very important, is the quickness to ship that comes with this iteration. So how quickly will you be able to ship your product or that new version, that new feature? And this takes into account the time to design, to create the product, but also to implement the product. And I think that's very important. And sometimes we always want, to make our product even more perfect, adding, before we ship, let's just add this little thing on top of it. That will be better. Yeah, maybe, but it will delay the time you will ship. And every day that you wait before shipping is a day that maybe your user will choose a competitor because their problem is not solved. It's also a day that maybe your competitors will be closer to you because they are catching up. Maybe if you are in advance with the competition, they are catching up on you. And it's also a day where you're not working on bringing more value to the user. So it's important to ship it as fast as possible. Again, it's not that you need to ship the fastest as possible, but it's a matter of finding the right trade-off between these 5 criteria. Sometimes it's very obvious. Sometimes it's a bit more difficult to find. It usually depends on where you stand in terms of your company, in which stage. If it's an early startup or more advanced company, it may depend. It may depend on your industry as well. You may want to favor more the ease of use or favor more the coolness. It really depends. But you have to find a trade-off between these different criteria.
I love those 5 in the mix because I feel like they're a mix between rational and emotional. Like you mentioned, usefulness in a sense that it's got to serve a purpose. If I wanna rent the car, well, the outcome of the process should be me being able to rent the car. So that's
Okay.
useful, right? But then if that's the only thing, I think it's really difficult to differentiate sometimes. So I love the coolness aspect, and I think coolness you can define in many different ways, but it has a lot to do with the actual experience of it, right? We say delight people. To me, that's very different. It's then sort of like get people from A to B. It's very different than delight. Delight to me is a different level. It's
key. It's exactly
experience, right?
Exactly. For me, it's key. It's Warren Buffett who said. I just paraphrase. I don't remember the exact quote, but you have to delight your customer. Don't settle for satisfied, because at the end, if you're just satisfied for a service, like you're just satisfied, you're okay with a restaurant, you will never talk about it to your colleagues or friends. You will only talk about experiences that were delightful, or on the other end, really awful. But so you better aim to be on the delight side rather than just being satisfied, because being satisfied is just normal. You won't gain any word of mouth or anything about that. Also, if you are usually delighting your customers, your users, they will kind of love your product or your company. So it's also, sometimes you have bugs, you have some issues, and if sometimes the experience is not as great as usual, if the users love your product or your company, it will be much easier for them to accept this kind of small roadblocks, I would say, that may happen, and they will be much more forgiving as well.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. When it comes to rational versus emotional, because, and I've made this experience myself, if I'm a fan of something, I'm okay with sometimes, them messing something up, or, it's not being available or something like that. I'm okay with that. But if the only function it would serve is usefulness, I would be totally not okay, because it would actually disrupt the usefulness. If usefulness is the only thing I get from that, and it's 1% less useful, well, that's a direct experience that I have. But if usefulness is maybe only half or maybe 80%, and the other part is I just want to feel good when I use it, I just want to have a certain experience, it makes a big difference. And also, interestingly, what I found is that people often remember the actual experience. They don't really remember with how many clicks they went from A to B. They remember the actual experience of something. They remember the stories. They remember, certain situations where they were delighted at the end of the day, right? They don't remember when they were satisfied. They remember when they were delighted. And that's an interesting one. When it comes to loyalty, also when it comes to word of mouth, I mean, when you go to the movies, you go to the cinema, and you watch a movie that was useful in terms of, it was okay. You're not going to talk about it much, but if it was amazing and delightful, you're going to tell people about it. I think that
not only you will not talk about it, about the movie that was okay, but you will forget it very quickly.
Yes.
I mean, if you watched like 1 week ago a movie on Netflix or whatever that was just okay, probably you don't even remember it anymore. But if it was great, you remember it.
Yeah. It's a really interesting difference, because it doesn't just make it 20% better. It actually makes it dead or alive.
Yeah, it could, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
One thing I also want to talk a little bit about is leadership, in terms of, especially, I mean, you guys have been growing immensely over the past couple of years. And, with growth or change or other situations where things are not constant, there's a lot of interesting challenges that come up. And it's not always easy to lead in an environment where things are rapidly changing, transforming, growing. Is there a certain playbook that you use to be, to stay sort of like flexible, to stay resilient, to stay, to not become too rigid about certain things? Is there a certain playbook or certain principles that you use for yourself to lead, to go through change, to go through growth?
Well, if there is a playbook, I would like to read it. No, I think it's, well, I would say my approach, not necessarily reflecting everybody's approach, but I think it's important to stay true to yourself, and have some good guiding principles, and that's important. I would say for a personal level, but also at a company level, to try to define your culture, and try to stick as close as possible to your culture. That's a challenge for every day, because the culture is not something that you define once and you make posters and you display in the office and you say, oh, that's good, we have our culture. Because the culture is not about the word, it's about the act. So you really have to act every day according to your culture. And sometimes it's quite easy, sometimes it's quite challenging, but that's how you build that culture, and how you try to keep this when you are growing. But of course, that's challenging when you are onboarding like 200 or 300 people per year, like it happened to us last year, something like that. That's a challenge for sure. So that's a challenge to onboard, to transmit that culture to all these people that you're onboarding. Even before you onboard them, that's a challenge to find the right people to hire. Fortunately, we have great people in the people organization at Nexthink that help every hiring manager to find the right people. But that's I would say when building a company, finding the right people is not far from being the biggest challenge. Sometimes much more than finding customers, or building the right product, or finding the right engineering trick to do this or that. Hiring is much more difficult, in my opinion. That's, at least for me, it's quite difficult.
Yeah, I think it's not only your opinion. I think this is a pretty much a red line in almost every company. And so let's talk about, I really want to get your perspective on culture, staying true to yourself, and the topic of hiring. How do you, first of all, what's your perspective on culture? Do you think that when you hire people, people should be a culture fit or match? Or do you think people should add to the culture? Or do you think it's some mix and balance? And what's your perspective?
Well, I think that that's a mix for sure. Everybody that who arrives in the company is bringing something, that's for sure. But I would say that it should be still compatible with the culture that we want in the company. Because if you are adding 200 people, if everybody is adding something very different, that will be quite difficult. So for me, there must be a culture. I don't know if it's cultural fit, but I'm always trying to bring people that I want to work with. I mean, the technical skills or the hard skills are important, but I want to hire people that I'm happy and I'm also delighted to work with. That's really important. And which one is the most important? You know, sometimes again, that's a trade-off. The skills, I think it's much easier to learn the skills if the person is smart enough. They can learn whatever. So learning the skills, it's quite easy. If the person is not a good person, I would say, or a toxic person, they won't really change. You cannot make them learn that. So I think that's very important when hiring someone to detect that. I prefer to find someone that I would love to work with, even if the skills are not there completely yet, because if I feel that they have the potential to learn and to improve, that will be fine. We will help them to grow, rather than finding the star in the domain, but they are pain in the ass to work with. For sure.
Yeah, really interesting perspective also on the culture match versus the add to it. And it's sort of like two circles that overlay, and I guess the overlay is what you're looking for. And also in terms of soft skills versus hard skills, I guess that's very common as well, that I hear that. And it's also interesting because sometimes we hear that there's a huge skills gap in a sense. And on the other side, I hear that the skills gap sometimes is a lot more the soft skills gap, or that's more difficult, that's more tricky. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting conversation. And the last question I want to ask you is a little bit more into the future, up in the sky, but I always love to hear the answer to that. So let's imagine you're 80 years old now, and you're sitting in your rocking chair or whatever and looking out through the window and looking back at your life. What's something that you would want to see has changed, like over that period from today to when you're 80 years old, either in the world of business, in the world in general, whatever it may be? Is there something that you really feel you would love to see changed?
Well, I would like that the world in general is a bit better than before. I think we can all bring our little stone to the building, I would say, so that everybody should try to change things to the better, a piece at a time. Of course, some people can have a tremendous impact, but most people is only a small impact, but it adds up with a lot of people. So I think that I hope that the world will go in terms of business, in terms of everything, basically, in terms of business, in terms of products, because I like products, that things go towards a better world, to the benefit of humans, because I mean, we do that for humans. That was the main point of our discussion. So at the end, that the world is better for humans at the end. So I think that's something that I'm looking forward to see. And I hope I will contribute as little as I can, but that I contribute to that path.
I love that. Also, what I love specifically about this is that, most people, sometimes I feel like everybody's trying to move the mountains, or everybody expects everybody else to move mountains. And sometimes expectations can be very tricky, because I think if we're expecting in a sense that, you know, maybe not everybody is going to move Mount Everest, but everybody can move a stone. Everybody can move a stone. And if everybody, or even just most people would, you know, there will be 100 Mount Everests that were moved. So I love that aspect very, very much. And thank you so much for being here and sharing.
Welcome. Thank you.
Patrick. And yeah, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.